the same sentiment on Brett Weinstein. I use this analogy with thinkers. I was like, I see them as spices on a rack. Like not every spice or not every thinker is for every dish or for every time you're trying to like logically make sense of something. But sometimes you need to mix it up. And I was saying this because people just did not understand how can you like Jordan Peterson? How can you like Ta-Nehisi Coates? Because Ta-Nehisi Coates was my former professor. And plus I liked him anyway before that. Like, how can you like both of them? And I'm like, because I don't think either of them are Bibles. I don't think they're all wholly right or wholly wrong. Like I get certain different things from quotes that I get from Jordan. Like I really admire more so his mind and how he critically gets at ideas. And I really admire Ta-Nehisi and how he helped me write better as a journalist. I really love the way he constructs your prose. Like, and then other people that, and the thing is like people might look at Jordan and not like him for the same reasons I like it's right. That's the downfall sometimes, is when people just say this one person is the one person I follow, or these 5 people I follow, and no matter what, they're right, which is why people love it's so polarized, because people are being like the cheerleaders of these people, even though they're like, actually I disagree with that. They feel like they're portraying them in some way if they critique that person or challenge them. Like, no, like that's life. Like, don't you do that with your friends? I'm sure that your friends don't do everything that you think is correct. And when they do something that you think is foul, what do? Do you say, no, that's okay, girl, you do it? No, you're like, yo, you're better than this. It's like, I don't understand why people, I think people are just afraid of confrontation. I think, why do you think people are so afraid of speaking out? Is it the mob? Like, is it cancel culture? Or is it just people have a lack of confidence? Like, people aren't used to that. Like, what do you think? Especially from your side as a mindset coach.
Such a good question. Yeah, such a good question, Brittany. And I think it's multi-layered. I don't think there's one answer. If I was to really simplify it and kind of bring it back to the self, which is easier for a lot of us to kind of hold, I think we have a fear of being abandoned. I think at the simplest level, when you think about it, a fear of being abandoned, you can call it a fear of being rejected, a fear of being cast out of the community, which is a very human primal thing. You can't get rid of it. The need to be accepted and wanted, it's a very human thing, because there was a time thousands and thousands of years ago where if you were cast out by your community, you would die. You would actually die. You wouldn't be able to survive. And that's hardwired within us. And we just have to navigate it in different ways in the modern world. But if we are to look at this through the lens of what people call as cancel culture, which I also refer to as this unforgiving culture, I think there's something called cancellation by proxy, where people have seen what happens to the people that speak out. People have seen, right? Think of how we're not just in a time anymore where you have to be a celebrity or a public figure to have a huge number of nameless, faceless people demanding you to prove your goodness, demanding an apology, demanding you to have the right thought, the right opinion. Our lives are heavily digitalized. And I would say, and I'm doing a bit of research actually to really look at the impacts of 2020 all around the world, being in lockdown, isolation, and, kind of turning to our mobile phones, our devices as a way to connect. I would say last year, a lot of us found ourselves being in the digital space more than we did in the real world, if you will. And that has had a huge impact, which means a lot of us have witnessed people being, quote unquote, what is called cancelled, where we have seen someone being ostracized by the community. We've seen what happens when you ask a question that is not on the list of the right questions to ask, when you express an opinion that is not on the list of the right opinions to have, where you are on the political side that is deemed as being on the wrong side of history, where you have a different feeling about the impacts of lockdown, about masks, if you will. Now it's vaccination, right? There's always something. You're only given 2 options in whatever category. So there's a huge fear, and it's not just the fear of the self anymore, it's the collective. And the running commentary, what I think of it as is, I've seen what happens to other people when they choose to be themselves. I've seen what happens to other people, and I'm not going to let it happen to me. So it happens. That's why I'm so fascinated with self-censorship, because you won't even realize you're doing it a lot of the time. Because once you start censoring your own thoughts and you become very skilled at doing that, why the fuck would you allow someone else to publicly express their thoughts when you won't even give yourself the same permission? So there's a lot of resentment there as well. Like, how dare you feel that you have the right to express yourself when I can't? So it's a very multi-layered thing that comes back to abandonment.
That is, I mean, I'm saying I agree, but yes, that's how I feel about cancel culture. And I'm not shocked at, I'm just not shocked at how or why people will marry themselves into a group or into a narrative or an identity. Yeah. Because one, you're safe, so to speak. Like, the group will protect you at all costs. If you go with the group, there's a sense of comfort because you're not alone. And then there's community. So I'm not at all seeing how society is operating, like you said, with the phones and with cancellation by proxy, and just seeing man, I know this is wrong, but I am not going to be what Sally, I'm not going to let what's happened to Sally happen to me. And they just keep it in internally, like we were keeping it in until we had to say something. And I know you're, I don't want to take up all your time, but something popped into my mind when you first talked about Jordan Peterson and that 3-minute clip of why you were nah, I am not listening to him. And why it is damaging for people to one, hinge their opinions on other people's thoughts and not fully giving someone the chance to explain themselves, to listen to the entire debate that he was on or whatever. What was the thing that that you heard that made you dislike him? What was the video?
Oh gosh, I always burst out laughing when I think about this, because Brittany, it's so ridiculous that I'm just wow, okay. This was in 2018, and a friend of mine, and again, as I mentioned before, I was in kind of feminist spaces, didn't even call myself as such, didn't even think I was taking on any of the ideology. But it's amazing how certain things just seep in. And I'm not against feminism as a whole, but I just have feelings, my own feelings about whatever we call feminism today. I just don't, have a lot of feelings about that. We can talk about it in part 2. A friend of mine showed me this clip. So this was the interview that Jordan Peterson did here in the UK with a journalist called Kathy Newman, Channel 4. And the interview was, I think, about
so much.
By
that
your face,
I
know
it well.
You know it well. So the full interview, I'm sure, is about half an hour. So this was a specific clip where he was talking about the gender pay gap. And he was saying that there's a lot of misinformation about what it actually is, whether it actually exists, what it actually looks like. And he was just talking about the fact that data shows that women are just more agreeable than men. Women don't tend to negotiate the salaries, whereas men do. He was stating out, he was not being overly emotional about anything or giving his own subjective experience about his wife or his child or his daughter. He was just giving the data, very objective. And I saw this clip and my skin was crawling. I said, this man hates women. This man hates women, and he's so intelligent that it's actually very dangerous. This is the kind of intellect that is so dangerous. I wouldn't be able to tell you what I even meant by that. But I know that before I had actually listened to that interview, I had heard about him. I'd heard about how he's a transphobe, how this and that, because 2018 was kind of the year where he blew up into the mainstream, where people started knowing who he was. And I just made a very firm decision. I didn't even finish the entire 3-minute clip. I just saw everything I needed to see, everything I needed to solidify, everything I'd heard about him before. And I held those feelings up until early 2020, up until last year, when I knew that something is happening internally within me that's not quite right. I didn't have the language for it. So I wanted to seek out people that could help me get some language for what I feel. And very similar to the process that you took yourself through, which is so brilliant. Think about the people that I've discarded and revisit it with fresh eyes. And it was so uncomfortable, which is why that process, I never ever want to romanticize the process of being in self-censorship, feeling like you're the one with the wrong thoughts and going into whatever the other side might look like. It's not a romantic process. It's not as profound as it is. You don't just decide that you're removing self-censorship and you're done. There's some kind of guilt that comes with it. I remember watching, I was like, you know what, I'm going to engage with Jordan Peterson's work in good faith. My partner at the time was a huge Jordan Peterson fan, and he would always send me kind of Joe Rogan clips. I also had my own feelings about Joe, even though I had never watched a full interview, and now I absolutely love him. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to engage in good faith. And I just watched a lecture. I felt so uncomfortable. I didn't want to agree. Even as I was watching, I could feel my brain looking for things to disagree with, just so I could say, see, I had my reasons for not liking him. It wasn't just that clip. It wasn't what I'd had. I see, there we go. And it never came. I was waiting for it and it never came. And I watched another lecture, listened to his podcast, still felt as if, you know, like almost like I was watching it in secret. Like I didn't want anyone to know that I'm watching Jordan Peterson. And I agree. I was waiting for something bigoted. I was waiting for something racist, waiting for something transphobic, waiting for something misogynistic. It never came. I was just met with a very, very sensitive man. I mean, he would cry in some of his lectures because he'd be talking about how art is so beautiful. He'd be just, completely different to the image that I had in my head. And then from him, as is usually the case, you just end up finding different people, different thinkers. And that's just how that started for me. And now he's one of my biggest inspirations, and I have no shame. And I can't believe that I even felt some kind of shame. But this is just how deep this stuff goes, that you will feel as if you're betraying some kind of movement or some kind of community that you don't even know, just by listening to information that might oppose your beliefs. It's insane. It's insane.
And I understand, like, not being unabashed with saying, like, I like Jordan Peterson. Before, years ago, if I secretly liked him, I would never. But like now, I'm like, I don't care. I can like who I like. I don't care. But I know like people probably react with us because we're black. We're black women. One, we're black 100%. And we're women. Like completely the antithesis of what people think his audience is. Yeah.
You know what's so interesting? I don't know if you've experienced this as well. I have a lot of black men in my life, whether it's my brother, my cousins, they love Jordan Peterson. So when I actually speak to the men in my life again, I was always making assumptions about what people like and who they are. So many, because he's really helped men to understand themselves emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, in a very holistic yet objective way. And he's inspired and helped a lot of men come out of the dark, come out of the shadows, you know. So when I actually speak to men, this is why I always encourage people, just speak to people in the real world. They love him. They always recommend him. But because I am a woman and I'm black, there's just this idea that I should just hate him by default. It's so sinister.
Because of our gender and race, people assume like there's no way. And it's like, no, that's not true. I agree with that because there's so many, and it's specifically black men that I talk to that aren't like necessarily conservative, that are like, oh yeah, I have his book 12 Rules of Life. Oh yeah, like I love that guy. That's my dude. And I don't know if it's
and he's not even conservative.
I know that's the thing. That's the thing. But people just assume like, oh, you like him, then you must be. It's like, no. The whole boxes is so arbitrary. Like there's so much I can ask in this conversation. Like I lost track of time, but I know you are busy, and I'm just gonna ask one final question. What advice would you give someone who's struggling to simply think for themselves for the first time?
Someone who's struggling to think for themselves for the first time. First of all, the advice, if you will, but I see it more as an invitation, because I think there's so much advice out there. I can just give an invitation. I would say, I invite you to stop entertaining the idea that you can't think for yourself, because I think that's what we do. We tell ourselves, I can't think for you can. You can. You're just censoring those thoughts. So maybe the first step, and this is just really simple, it's not big, profound advice or information, but first start to get rid of this idea that you can't think for yourself, because we're taking in so much information that is making it seem that way, but that's not true. On a day-to-day basis, even in the simplest way, you're the one that decides when you're going to wake up. You're the one that decides that you're going to brush your teeth. You decide which side of the room you're going to walk to first. Just really simple everyday things that allow you to understand that actually, yeah, I do think for myself in very simple ways. So maybe I could apply that same thing in something else. So I always say, let's start as small as possible. Then the second thing I would say is to realize that you don't have to externalize everything. I think the pressure for a lot of people comes from thinking, okay, now that they feel this way, they have to share it, whether it's on their Instagram page or talk about it. You don't have to. It can be a very internal process. And I would actually argue that it needs to be an internal process to begin with. Listen to people. I think, Brittany, you've laid out a really powerful process. Think of people that you have maybe discarded, people that you have told yourself, I can't listen to this person because they're this, because I've heard. We have access to way too much information, I would argue. But if you look specifically, find those people again, sit through that discomfort and just listen to people that think a little bit differently. Start to get curious about your own thoughts. Take it as a little project for yourself, something you don't even have to share. Just make it a private thing that will allow you to really cultivate the internal confidence you need to maybe one day externalize those ideas. So I think it's kind of like a slow and very simple but sustainable process. And it starts by you telling yourself that actually you do think for yourself and you do it every fucking day.
Yeah, that's perfect advice. And I love that you said it's slow, it's gradual, because for us, it both was that way.
Yeah.
Even though it was happening unbeknownst to us. I think because it was gradual and it was happening so organically and authentically, when we were confronted with it, like head on, whether it was one thing or multiple of things, it was undeniable. And then we were like, yo, we can, the choice is simple, but it's hard. That's the thing. It isn't easy. But it's so freeing. Wow. It is so freeing. It really is. And if you want to know more information on Africa Brooke, if you want to get more information on how to do the internal work, she's a mindset coach, people. Like, you have a website. Can you tell us where we can find your website and your social media so people can get more gems from you?
Absolutely. So my website is africabrooke with an E at the end.com. There you'll be able to just find out more about how I work, what it is that I do. But if you want kind of more practical ways of engaging with me, you can find that on my podcast. So my first podcast is called Beyond the Self, where it's all about the individual, but it's very much looking at things that are within your control. We spend way too much energy talking about and looking at things that are outside of our control. And I think it's important to bring it back in. What can I control? So my podcast, Beyond the Self, is all about that. Then my second podcast, Unfiltered with Africa Brooke, is where I talk about self-sabotage and self-censorship, but looking at it at the collective level. What is happening in society right now? What is happening in our culture right now? How can we take responsibility on an individual level and a collective level without dehumanizing each other? And it's all about finding common ground in a divided world. And lastly, my social media, only one that I have is Instagram. You can find me at Africa Brooke.
Follow her, people. Follow her. That's all I have to say. See for yourself, because you're going to get a lot of knowledge and insight. Thank you so much for this. I enjoyed this candid conversation. I am so glad we finally got to meet. I'm such a fan of your work. You're doing great things. And everyone else, thank you for watching American Shade. Tune in. And thank you, Africa. Thank you so much.
Thank you so